I'm in love with my own shirt. I wonder if it's possible to marry a t-shirt. Hi y'all! So this week I want to talk about my experience going to New York Comic Con for the first time. And the reason I want to talk about it is not because it's a particularly exciting story. I didn't do very much, I didn't go to any panels, I didn't meet any celebrities, nothing like that. And normally those are the only stories you hear about Comic Con because that's why people go. But that's exactly why I want to talk about my experience, because it's not as exciting or as glamorous, if you can call it glamorous, I guess, like geeky glamorous, I don't know. But it was still a very important moment for me and a very important experience, and I think I would have had an easier time accepting the kind of experience I had as a positive one if I had heard other people also saying that similar experiences were positive. So I want to just try to put that out there in case it makes anyone feel better about taking baby steps when they're trying to do something hard. I have wanted to go to New York Comic Con specifically for years. I remember watching years ago just footage inside the con being set up, and I just broke down crying because at that time I was doing probably the worst I've ever done with my anxiety and my depression. My agoraphobia got so bad that I literally didn't leave my house for 6 months. Like, if I walked outside the house, I would just literally fall down and not be able to breathe and not be able to move. So obviously going to a con, and at that time I didn't live in New York City, I lived in Florida. So it was also like having to travel there and make this a big thing. And then on top of it, trying to go to the con. And I have a lot of sensory issues. So I'm not great with crowds. I'm not great with loud sounds or bright lights. And especially if you combine that all together, I just tend to fall apart. And I kind of spiraled so far, I didn't even really want to go to smaller cons because I'm like, well, I probably couldn't handle that either. And what's the point if I can't go to this one that I really want to go to? It doesn't matter, which isn't true, but of course, like, you get very binary and black and white, I think sometimes, at least I do, when I'm really depressed or anxious. I just break everything down into, you're absolutely not good enough, and this is a proof why. Now, I live in New York, and pretty much all of my friends are big time nerds. A lot of my friends go to Comic-Con every single year, so I'm just perpetually hearing these stories of how much fun they had and who they met, and I'm always just like sitting at home watching their pets, and it was really starting to get to me. And with my therapist, I've been working a lot on exposure therapy, which is kind of gradually doing things that are harder and harder for me and for my particular mental health challenges. And when you do that, you're supposed to like master each step, like try something that's like a little bit out of your comfort zone, get really as comfortable with it as you can, and then move on to the next thing. I'm super bad about like trying a small thing and then going 10 steps up on my list. And this may have been a little bit that this year, but I did work it through with my therapist, at least like after I kind of broke down and bought the ticket. I was very scared, but I want to do it so badly. I wasn't thinking clearly. I'm like, whatever, like I just need to try this. Something I had done previously with my exposure therapy is I had gone to a smaller con. I went to NerdCon in Boston a couple of years ago, and that was much, much smaller. It was still very overwhelming for me. It was a lot. I had to take a lot of breaks, but I got used to the experience in general. The other thing I do with my exposure therapy is I will set minimums for my goal. Like if I'm doing something really hard, like when I went to NerdCon, I was terrified and I didn't know what I could handle. I'd never done anything like that. So the minimum that I worked out with my therapist was I at least had to walk through the door. That's all I had to do. And that was hard enough. Like I know, especially if you don't have mental health issues or you don't have the particular ones I do, that may sound like a really easy thing to do. That may sound like nothing, but it was a huge deal because for days leading up to the exposure, I couldn't focus, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat well, I couldn't do anything because I was so scared about what this experience was going to be like. Just perpetually having panic attacks, perpetually in meltdown mode, just losing it. And by the time I got to the building, I was shaking, I was hyperventilating, I could barely walk, I was sobbing. I did not think I could walk in the door. Like that was a very hard thing to do. The way I work with my therapist with these minimums is if I do at least a minimum, then I'm basically not allowed to consider myself a failure, because that is always what I revert back to, is like, you're a failure, you're never going to do anything with your life, like why do you even bother trying, because your life is never going to mean anything. So I'm pretty much just like a hard and fast rule that like if you walk through the door, you have done everything that you set out to do and you do not have to feel bad, and anything else you do from that point on is gravy. It ended up being a really, really fun experience, and I knew then I could handle smaller cons as long as I did it really mindfully and was aware of my limits. So of course I ended up buying a ticket to New York Comic Con because I'm a genius. And I was okay after I bought the ticket, except to buy it fairly far in advance. So I'm like, by that time, somehow I'll be magically cured, which is also something I tend to think all the time, that I'm just gonna snap and be completely fine. As it got closer, I started getting very nervous. It was going on Sunday because my friends told me that would probably be the slowest day. One friend was telling me, oh, you can come in like the last couple hours of the day because normally everybody's left by then. You can kind of wander around, there's not as many crowds. And I'm like, okay, that's what I'll plan on doing. So I set up my minimum to be just walking through the door, same as it was for my smaller con. And then if I couldn't handle it, I was hoping to just kind of mess around the city for a couple hours and then come back about 3 or 4 o'clock and at least spend 1 or 2 hours in the con and kind of get used to it. And then when I got to the city, like as soon as I could see the skyline, because I live about an hour and a half from New York City, so as soon as I could see the skyline, I was like just spiraling. I'm like, what are you doing? What are you thinking? You can't handle this. Like, you are completely ridiculous. This is so far beyond what you are supposed to be doing. The main thing that was making me very scared is it's something I've wanted to do for so long because, again, something I think that may not be very obvious if you don't have mental health problems is it gets very confusing because it's almost like there are two of you. Like, I feel like there's the healthy me and she has particular interest and likes and things that she would love to do that my mentally ill side just hates or could not handle. And one of those things is like a big con. I would love to be around a massive crowd of people that are all passionate about something and a lot of what I'm passionate about. I'd love to go to all these panels and spend all day at it and just spend all 4 days there and just like completely living and absorbing every moment. I would adore that. Like, a con is like my perfect happy place that I can possibly imagine. So it's really, really disheartening to then have my mental health keep me from being able to enjoy that. As long as I hadn't gone to New York Comic Con, I could always kind of keep it in the back of my head of, oh, maybe it's not as crowded as the photos make it look. Maybe it's not as bad as all the video clips you've seen. Maybe you'd be completely fine there. That was always just such a nice idea to have in the back of my head that, hey, maybe you could do this and you just don't know because you haven't tried. But as soon as I had tried, I was so afraid that I was going to find out that it was something I could absolutely never handle doing in my entire life. So anyway, I knew I wasn't going to like actually have like the full experience of the con this time, but I was hoping like my positive was going to be, okay, let's go in, we'll just kind of walk around for a few hours, we'll get the feel, we'll see what it's like, and you can be better prepared to then go next year and do more next year and just kind of keep building on it, like just work on the exposure therapy with it. I was just very afraid that I was going to walk in because there are some things I know I just will probably never be able to do that are probably something that is either years and years and years of work away or just isn't that likely. And I was completely terrified that I was going to find out that New York Comic Con was one of those things, that I was going to walk in and be like, this can absolutely never happen. I was coming up with every excuse why I shouldn't go. I'm like, oh, I don't even want to go, or what's the point? Or I, like, my friends that are there, I don't want to have to ask them to come be with me if I have a hard time there because I was going to be going in by myself. I'm like, I could think of like 10 million reasons why I shouldn't go. And I just kept focusing on the fact that, oh, if you don't do this, you're going to have to tell your therapist that you didn't even try for your minimum, really. We had picked up a friend that was just going to like walk with me up to the con. What I hadn't thought about, and this is on me, and I started again spiraling because my depression and anxiety were looking for any proof that I was terrible and couldn't do this and couldn't do anything at all. So what I hadn't thought of was just how bad the crowds outside the con would be. Boston's just such a less congested city, so I had an easier time like being outside the con in Boston. It just didn't feel as packed. And in New York, and particularly the center around the Javits Center, it's not like that. So I was to be completely crowded. So I wasn't doing great already. And then the closer we got to the con, just the more and more people there were. And it was all these people trying to file onto, you know, this small sidewalk and very congested and that like New York speed where everybody's moving and you can't stop. And they were all coming like we were having to go against the traffic. So it was so overwhelming, and that I was excited because most of them were cosplayers. They were all like a bunch of cosplayers leaving early, and it was very cool to see. And part of my like healthy brain was like, this is incredible. This is the stuff you only see photos of. This is so great. I started having a hard time, and I was like, I can't even fully see the Javits Center yet. Like, what am I thinking? And I just kept spiraling. I had to stop at one point and just like sit on a curb because it was getting to a point where like I was getting chest pains, I couldn't breathe. I knew I was about to have like a sensory meltdown, and so I'm like, okay, I need to just sit somewhere quiet. And again, my friend like knows the city well, like she lives there, so she's like, I know exactly where to take you. So she's able to find this like little offshoot off the street where it was quieter and I could like sit on a curb. I kind of just sat for a few minutes and breathed and kind of tried to get myself together. And after about 15 minutes, I was like, okay, let's try again. Let's just keep going. And I walked about a block and a half, 2 blocks, and just completely lost it. Like, I just felt like everywhere around me were people and they weren't stopping, and there was never a break. There was never like a lull in between people. It was just over and over and over and over and over again, people coming. I started shaking. I couldn't breathe. I was starting to like lose my depth perception. Like, I was just not doing well. So we had to go all the way back the way we had come, those like block and a half, 2 blocks, and sit down in the same place again. By that point, I was just so ashamed. I just started crying. And I was so mad at myself because I'm like, it's so close and all I have to do is just walk in the door and I can't even get to the door. And I was really mad at myself for not realizing how busy it was going to be outside the con, because I'm like, you should have known this, and of course that means you're stupid, and what were you thinking? And like, my therapist didn't necessarily know because she's never been to the con, so like when we set our minimum, like she also wasn't thinking, wow, the crowd's gonna be a lot worse than they were in Boston, maybe making it to the door shouldn't be the minimum. Eventually calmed down a little bit. I wasn't crying as much. I thought I didn't look as upset at least, but this one cosplayer saw me and she like walked behind us and asked my friends, like, is she okay? And they're both like, she's having an anxiety attack, you know, she's all right. And then she looked at me and she's like, do you need a hug? Would that help? And I'm like, yes. So I try to stand up, but I've completely lost my balance at this point from the panic and sensory. So I'm like stumbling. So I've managed to right myself, and I'm like babbling at the same time and explaining to her like, yeah, like my therapist wants me to just walk through the door, but I can't even make it to the door because there are so many people and I don't know what I was thinking. And she's like, oh, I know, it's a lot. It's so much. So she ends up giving me like the biggest hug and just holding me for a few minutes. And she like whispers to me while she's holding me, like, I know what this feels like. And that just really grounded me a lot, because I'm like, okay, I don't know if she's had panic or if she's close to someone with panic, but I'm like, look at her now. Here she is, this very, in my mind, what seems to be this very confident, capable person. And I'm like, okay, well, if you could cosplay at New York Comic Con, maybe I can work through this and eventually be able to do something like that, at least be able to attend now. So it gave me a little bit of hope. It was just so kind. Like, my friends are great, but it's so nice sometimes having a stranger be really comforting in those situations, because I can always, like, again, my depressed brain can always be like, oh, your friends have to be nice to you. They don't really mean it. They're exhausted by you. Like, they just feel obligated to tell you you're okay or to be nice to you. But the stranger didn't, you know, she could have just walked past me. Like, no part of my brain could be like, oh, well, she had to help you. So that really meant a lot and helped. I just kind of sat for a little bit longer and we just watched the cosplayers. We're like, well, at worst, this is like a cosplay parade. This is pretty cool. So we were still enjoying it. I got up and I was like bracing, trying to do it again. And as I was doing this, and I'm still not 100% sure what this person said, but I think this is what she said, and it freaks me out. But this one woman had been across the street from us also sitting and had kind of been watching me sometimes. And I felt a little weird about it because I'm like, I hate drawing attention to myself, especially when I'm panicking. But she ended up crossing the street, and as I'm getting up to go, she walks past me and then she turns around and over her shoulders, I'm pretty sure, just said, your anxiety has passed. I swear from that point on, I did not have like a full-on panic attack again. I would get anxious and be like buzzy and a little off, but not like a full-on attack. I'm pretty sure she was a witch. But I'm like, this is a great spell if that's the case. Thank you. You're awesome. I managed to walk through again, and I was feeling a little better. Like, again, I didn't go into a full panic attack, but I was making it through. I was trying really hard to just be focused and to be aware of how I was feeling. I just wasn't going full on into the sensory meltdown again. I wasn't doing great, but I was doing okay. I kept taking little breaks, like pulling off as much as I could out of the crowd and trying to stand for just a couple minutes. Then eventually I'm like across from the building, and my girlfriend's like, oh, just make it through, just cross the street and go in right now. And I'm like, I can't. So I was just standing across the street from the building for like 10 minutes, just staring at it and trying to work myself up to it. And like, I kept like monitoring people going in and out because they were coming out of the building in waves. So I'm like, I was trying to like get a sense for how long the lulls usually lasted so I could know if I could like just run through. While I was doing that, someone came by who was walking their dog and they could tell it was freaking out, so they let me like pet their dog for a while. Like, it was a big fluffy golden retriever that just kept pressing against me and calming me down, so that really helped. Eventually I could see that like one of the doors like hadn't been touched, no one had gone in or out for a few minutes. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do it. So I like ran across the street and just very quickly just like plowed through the door. And as soon as I was inside the building, I couldn't even process it. I was just shocked that I actually had managed to do it. And then I ended up almost crying because like I've seen so many photos of the Crystal Palace. I've seen so many video clips of people inside there, and I've wanted to be in there forever. And just realizing that I was actually seeing it from the inside, like I couldn't handle it. I wanted to cry. And in case anyone's watching who also has like sensory issues and hasn't done this and wants detail, because I want detail, I want like as much detail as possible. I'm the kind of person that reads like Yelp reviews on every place I go to before I go to see like what the temperature is like, and like I get it. When I walked in, like there was like almost no one there at right at the front, because everyone was like inside the con or leaving. So it was great. It was pretty empty at that point. By this point it was like 4:10. It was so much airier than I expected. Like, I really don't do well if I don't feel like there's airflow, or if there's not like noticeable air conditioning, or if I'm warm or stuffy or anything. And there was none of that. Like, it felt very airy. Like, it was a cloudy day, so that may have helped because it's like a glass building. I don't know what it's like when it's sunny, but on this cloudy day and it was cool out, it was like almost chilly inside. Not so much that I like had to have a sweatshirt on, but I probably could have if I wanted to. I could feel the AC, I could feel air moving. I did not at all feel constricted or trapped. I think having the glass everywhere really helped me because I could see outside from like every angle, and that made me feel a lot more centered, because I'm like, it was kind of tricky my brain. Like, I know that like every piece of glass is not like a way out of the building, but some part of my brain like was tricked into thinking that. So I'm like, oh, you can leave whenever, see outside, you're not trapped. Because that's what happens a lot if I'm in a really big building, like even like the center of a mall or something. I will start losing it. Like, this is basically a concrete tomb you're stuck in and you're never gonna get out. There were chairs that were all taken up, but there were nice wide windowsills everywhere that people were sitting on. No one was giving you a hard time. There were just like poles set up that had kind of lips, almost like windowsills around them too, and I was sitting on those. I'm like, okay, you've done past your minimums, so anything now is gravy. So I basically was just kind of taking stock and doing a lot of research for next year. Like, okay, what do you need to know to work with next year to plan what you can handle, what your coping strategy should be? So I tried on my headphones to see if it would block the noise of the crowd, and like a podcast didn't, but it did give me like a noise to focus on. Music, if I turn up louder, was pretty much blocking the sound. Again, I wasn't right in the crowd, but it was enough to block that at least. They let you bring the water bottles, they let you bring your own food, which is always a big thing for me. Like, I hate knowing I have to like get in line and get a water bottle. So that was super great. I was kind of just walking around, getting used to the feeling of it, like seeing where the Starbucks was, seeing where the mini marts were, like reading the sign and getting used to the way the signing worked, like figuring out where the security is and where you go to like check in, like just kind of getting all that in my head for next year. Basically, I was just like scouting it. And then I started feeling so much better. Once I was inside, it kind of calmed, and I started getting a bit of a high, like, oh my God, you did it, that I decided to actually check in just to like walk around a little bit, because it was still really packed. It was so much more packed than my friend had described. And she ended up telling me later that she does not know what happened, but that like this Sunday at Comic-Con was just completely packed, that it was no calmer than the rest of the weekend. And she's like, it's never like that, I'm so sorry. I was trying to take advantage of that once I realized it was crowded. I was like, okay, well, now you can kind of see what it's like with the crowd. So I did check in. I explained to the security guard beforehand, I'm like, I'm going to look weird because I just want to check in, walk through the gates, because the way it's set up, you have this big open area, and then you have security gates where you check in and like have your bag checked and go through a metal detector, and then the con is past that. So I'm like, I'm just gonna like walk through the gate and then turn around and probably walk right back out. And like, I have anxiety, I just kind of want to see what this feels like. And she was not getting it. Like, she was nice, but she was like, okay, like she didn't care. But like in my head, my like paranoid state I was in, I'm like, they're gonna think something's wrong with you if you just like walk in and turn around and walk back out. Like, they're gonna question you and you can't handle that. So I'm like just explain it up front. That's the other thing to be aware of too, is that like you can get to the Starbucks and the mini mart and all that stuff but without going through the con. So that was good to know for me too. I'm like, okay, if I want to go in and then get a tea to calm down or something before I actually enter the con, I can. Yeah, so anyway, I ended up like walking through security, and then once I was actually like past the gate, like you're right in the con right there. Like it was set up with like a Lego Star Wars display, and a couple different vendors and stuff were set up, like just displaying things. And it overlooks another section of the con where it's more crowded. So it's like I walk up to this and like you're right on a balcony looking over something else. So I walked through the gates, and as soon as I realized I was like actually in the con, I had like cosplayers around me and like vendors and families looking at stuff. I almost started crying. I was trying really hard not to cry because I didn't want to be that person like standing in a con by themselves just crying. But I almost did because I'm like, oh my god, I'm here. And like, I'm a big introvert. I don't often feed off the energy of people, but this was a little bit of an exception because I'm like, everyone here is like passionate and excited, and everything I love is represented here. And I was just like overstimulated, but in a good way. I was like, I'm just surrounded by like what's going on in my head 24/7 basically. It's like my head was just leaking out all the like nerdy glory I could possibly enjoy. I just kind of took it in, and I planned to just like turn around and walk back out. But once I was there, I'm like, okay, you're doing okay. And I never expected to like be able to walk through the con by myself. Like I was planning on calling one of my friends who were in the con to come meet me at the entrance, and then we'd walk around. By this point it was so late, they were all in like their final panels or the dealer's room and not able to get out. And I'm like, let's just see what we can do and then leave. I just kind of walked through, I looked at the Lego stuff, I took some photos. I took a bunch of photos like looking over the balcony at the crowd so I could remind myself of what it was like. I kind of was trying really hard to be hyper aware and catalog like, okay, this is what it feels like. This is how much elbow space you have. This is where you could like maybe sit on the floor if you had to for a second. This is where you could go stand and get out of the flow of traffic. Like I was just monitoring everything. And even when I was like with the crowd, it still felt fairly roomy and area. Like it didn't really feel like crazy crowded, cramped. Like the section I was at, I wasn't in the dealer's room or something. I know that's worse. But like the main section that you first walk into, I did feel like I had elbow room. I felt like I wasn't getting crushed. I didn't feel like people were like pushing me forward. I felt like I could just kind of loiter at the displays a little bit without feeling like I was getting shoved out of the way. I did feel like I could move my arms. I felt like I could find some place to stand to be kind of quiet for a second if I needed to. And even the sound, like the building is so tall, it kind of dissipates the sound. Like I'm not great with overwhelming white noise, and especially crowds of people. Like it makes me feel just like completely smothered and like I can't breathe. And this was like all kind of muted. It almost felt like having like a white noise machine on of people talking in the background, but down low. It was weird. It was kind of muted in a way that I did not expect that, and that was a huge relief to me, which is why I'm bringing it up. So I was just ecstatic. I felt silly because I'm like, you're not doing that much. But I was just so happy to be there. And the main thing that was making me excited is I knew when I was there that it was something that I can definitely work up to handling. It's something that I can like practice and go to smaller cons, go to more crowded places, have a game plan ready. And I know this is something I can do one day. And it was such a relief. It was not my worst fear confirmed. It wasn't walking in and like, okay, this is never, ever going to be a thing in your life. So I really wanted to stay longer by that point because I was feeling good. I'm like, I can mess around some, like maybe I'll try more stuff. But by this point, it was like 4:40, 4:45, and I'm like, you know what? Let's not push it too hard and get stuck in the jam of people trying to leave the con all at the same time. So I walked out of the building, and then like the whole walk back to the car, I'm just like babbling and giddy and ready to cry and just completely ecstatic. Not too long after that, like by the time I'm driving back home, I start spiraling again a little bit, and I'm like, you know, which is part of the reason I'm making this video, because I started immediately feeling pathetic. I was like, oh my god, all you freaking did was walk in a building and walk around the very entrance for like 20 minutes. What are you thinking? You've wasted money on this. Like, you've wasted everyone's time, like your girlfriend driving to the city and your friend walking into the building. Like, what are you doing? Like, this was for nothing. I just have to keep reminding myself that this was still a big win. Like, if I told myself, you know, years ago that, hey, you are going to get to be in the con one day and you're going to work up to it slowly, but you're going to be inside that building and you're going to know it's a thing that you can work up to handling and actually doing things at the con. I would have been ecstatic. I would have been shocked, first of all, because I would never have thought that I could even be in New York City. And New York City is hard for me, but I would have thought that it was like not even possible. Not even that it would be hard, but that it was something I like, basically that I was going to be asking myself to fly. Just knowing that that is on the table at all is a huge thing. Knowing I did it at all is a huge thing. Knowing that it's possible was such a comfort, and I think it's just really important, and the main point of this video is just to say that if you can only do something small, if you can only take a baby step, that's still really important. That's still something to celebrate, something to be proud of. It is a good story to tell. Like, if that's the only thing you come away with, something that feels like a small thing compared to what other people do, that doesn't mean it's a small thing. So I'm trying really hard to celebrate that and be excited. Which, if you have depression, you know, is such a huge thing. It's so important to know that there are good things in your life coming that you can work towards and kind of make happen. Anyway, that is how Comic-Con went for me, and I just wanted to share it because it is a little thing, but I'm super proud of it. And I hope if you are taking baby steps, or if you want to start taking baby steps, that you can be proud of those too, and hopefully share your stories, because I think we'll all feel less isolated if we know that we're not the only ones having to work on things and being proud of smaller accomplishments. I'll be back next week with another video. Until then, be well, be happy, and I'll see you soon.